You ever sit down to watch a tabletop role playing game video and realize you're 3 minutes into a sales pitch wrapped in a soft spoken brand deal pretending to be an opinion? Yeah, me too. And it's kind of breaking my heart a little bit. TTRPG YouTube, or if you're more specifically focused on Dungeons and Dragons content, you'd call it DungeonTube, used to feel like a smoky tavern with friends who talked about games, laugh about the chaos at the table, share some quote unquote war stories, in the miniatures battlefield or in the dungeon. But now it feels more like a trip to the mall, like interviews that just as well be, back and forth sponsorships, plugs, there's product launches, there's countdown timers to people's various Kickstarters, there's affiliate links in every other breath, Gen Con appearances. Like, seriously, dude, I'm not even going to Gen Con. And oh, wait, you told me it was sold out, so what's the point? So, yeah. TTRPGs, tabletop role playing games, are about storytelling, collaboration, and imagination. Not who can sell the most books that they maybe wrote 3 pages in, tops. Look, I get it. Creators need to eat. Okay, yeah, I do too. I get it. I'm not against people being successful. Heck, I'm all for, other people's success, especially in this hobby, because kind of the same way with YouTube, there's only like about 1% of YouTube that actually makes a significant portion of money, and the rest of us are just kind of here because we enjoy making videos, or we enjoy talking about whatever it is we talk about, in this case games. That spark of here's what excites me today at my table seems to be getting replaced with here's what I'm getting paid to care about today. And I see this a lot with certain really high-end YouTubers, DungeonTubers that have 200k plus subscribers, and the really high end, like the top, I'd say about 10, 15 YouTubers, DungeonTubers, probably, if I had to guess. I mean, I don't have exact statistics, but we'll just go with that. And I've had days too where I've wanted to rage quit YouTube, or where I've wanted to join the negative noise, because the other way to really quote unquote sell your channel is to complain about others, or straight up talk trash about others and do quote unquote response videos to, or reaction videos to, what the top, again, about 10 or 15 dungeon tubers are doing. And again, I hesitate to name names because I really don't want 800,000 people chasing me down the street, theoretically. Because yeah, some of these people have a fan base, and I really don't. And some of these people are actually approaching gold play buttons and have a really big fan base, and probably get more views per hour than I have, subscribers on my whole channel. So I don't really want to cheese those guys off that much, other than to just, make a few vague points about a couple of people that their videos are, like I say, they're becoming one long sales pitch, because you have the video's sponsor, but then you also have this book that they wrote like 3 lines in. Plus you have like their 3 or 4 Gen Con appearances that they're actually getting paid for, on top of just being at Gen Con, which, hello, if somebody paid my Gen Con ticket in my hotel room, I'd be there too. But that ain't happening anytime soon, that's for darn sure. So I get it. I mean, I keep coming back for something deeper, and maybe you can feel the pressure bleeding through for a lot of dungeon tubers. Upload more, say something spicy, maybe put down a clickbait title, be the first to cover the latest system or whatever, or just fade into irrelevancy. And meanwhile, honest creators, those of us who are out here trying to make thoughtful, weird, soulful stuff, get left behind because Algorithmo, the god of YouTube views, can't track heart no matter how hard we try. And I felt it. That temptation to chase the drama, or follow the money, and don't get me wrong, I wouldn't turn down a sponsor, but I mean, it whispers just compromise a little. You know, if you listen to that voice too long, you wake up in somebody else's battle armor and someone else's game, wondering where your voice went. You know, and I think that's a lot of what I'm driving at here, is the fact that I used to watch some of these channels for their honest takes on D&D. I mean, heck, this is back when I was still a 5e fan, and very, very much a 5e fan. You know, now it's all about a different game that I shan't mention yet much. Okay, I think about it all the time, but still, you know what I mean. But you know what viewers actually want? I think, here's the thing. Not everyone wants the big clickbait titles and the chaos and the latest scandal of the week from Wizards of the Coast or Darrington Press or whoever. Although Darrington hasn't really had their share of scandals. You know, some of us just want to put the noise behind us and have a nice, quiet place to fall in love with the hobby again. Some of us want someone who can just tell the truth without, you know, yelling a bunch of negativity about another YouTuber, another DungeonTuber. You know, we want actual advice. You know, what's a better way to run my game? What's a better way to present X, Y, and Z adventure? What's the latest, coolest character build, subclass, combination, whatever? You know, content made with care, not just calculation. You know, it's like, well, I charge $800 for a sponsorship on my video. Not that I personally do, but I'm just saying, you know, some DungeonTubers charge the big bucks. Some of these guys charge, you know, $800 a video or $800 a shot, you know, for a spot on their 10-minute video. And that's on top of the ads that, you know, YouTube will show you that have nothing to do with the video. and then have them mention, you know, like I say, their dungeon that they wrote like 3 pages for, or some monster book that they wrote a few pages in, or some Kickstarter that they had that was ghost written by, in all likelihood, somebody else that they contributed, you know, a few pages here and there to, you know. And I ain't about it. Now, I do know for a fact there is one DungeonTuber out there. He's, last I checked, got less than 2,000 subs, and the guy is just busting his hind end, putting out content for Shadow Dark, putting out content for Zweihander, and a bunch of other stuff. And dungeon tubing has kind of become his, like, back burner project, if anything. You know, and compare and contrast that with another guy I could name who, last I checked, hasn't made a video in almost a year and is making all these big appearances, and he has his own convention thing that he's organized. And yes, that does take a lot of work, and I understand that, but, you know, don't call yourself a DungeonTuber and run a Gen Con panel on how to be a DungeonTuber if you're not making videos. That's kind of a credibility issue, my friend. I'm sorry to tell you. Anyway, back on track here. You know, back during the Great Plague of 2020 that shan't be named, a lot of these big DungeonTubers were just getting started. And I can remember when some of these channels were still young and had like fewer than 100,000 subscribers, and people were just barely hearing of them, you know, and they'd gotten big from their cosplay stuff on Instagram, or they'd gotten big from just, you know, running a game during the Icky Cough Cough Plague, and it caught on. You know, they caught on. And they talked about building worlds and making characters and all this other cool stuff. And then some of their channels got really big, which put them in the sights of companies like Wizards of the Coast, or Paizo, or Darrington, although that's a more recent development, or, you know, whomever. And as long as they stayed out of quote-unquote trouble and didn't cause any kind of a massive controversy on social media, then they were golden. I would be really curious how many of those thousands of subscribers gained in 2020 are actually still fans. Or have these content creators gotten lost in their own echo chamber? You know, when everyone is telling you that you're right all the time, do you lose perspective on what you're doing? You know, in 2023, I noticed certain DungeonTubers started to really poison the well when it comes to criticism, in that if you question them or whatever company they happen to be pimping at the moment, you're automatically the devil, even if you have a valid concern. And I'm seeing it more and more all the time now, especially when it comes to Daggerheart content. You know, if you say anything bad about Daggerheart or Critical Role, Lord help you, there's probably going to be a mob chasing you down the street, at least on YouTube, because good gravy, you know, we see people with valid concerns who, despite maybe making a clickbait title, still get in trouble and get, you know, accused of being part of the outrage mill, being a bad person because, oh my gosh, I dared say something negative about Daggerheart. And it's sad. I've been biting my tongue over the course of about the last 2 or 3 videos of mine not to go full-on outrage mill on a handful of these big-name DungeonTuber types and call them out specifically, because no matter what any YouTube coach says, I want this channel to be about tabletop role-playing games, not rage-baiting the community or pushing 5 or 6 products plus my Gen Con panels all in one video. Now, would I say yes to a convention invite? Yeah, sure. Like I say, you know, if you have a video on YouTube, you know, and you want to have one, you know, sponsor to the video, and you want to talk about your one project that you have out either on Kickstarter or DriveThruRPG or itch.io or wherever, I think that's valid. I think that's great. Good for you. But when you start layering pitch on top of, oh, hey, did you see my buddy's game on Kickstarter? And did you see, you know, I'm going to be at PAX West for this, that, and the other panel, or I'm going to, you know, and it just layers on and on and on. It's like, what am I even listening to anymore? You know, it's like, what happened to world building? What happened to talking about characters? What happened to talking about, you know, various situations we run into as game masters? You know, some of these DungeonTubers, I'm not going to lie, like some of these DungeonTubers really used to inspire me. You know, I used to want to get back in and run more games because, you know, I'd see somebody made a video this past week that talked about, you know, NPC tips, or talked about, you know, more of a sandbox structure as opposed to a linear adventure model, which a lot of us grow up on and are, you know, taught as beginning game masters, and I'll get into that some other time. But, you know, you hear these videos and you get inspired and you think, man, this is going to be cool, you know? I mean, and some of these guys, you know, ran a lot of online games during the icky cough plague. And a lot of these guys had a voice during the great Dungeons and Dragons open gaming license debacle of 2023, because I just love to say that. You know, they had a voice then, and we listened, and we took them seriously, and we were big fans. You know, that's what fans do, and we follow you as fans, sometimes no matter what. Unfortunately, some of these fandoms have kind of gotten out of hand, and it's to the point now where if you make a comment down in their comments section, you better be telling them exactly what they want to hear. Some of the fans in the comments alone will troll the bejesus out of you, you know. And I'm like, yeah, and I'm not talking about, you know, little guys like, or, you know, smaller DungeonTubers that have, you know, 3,000 subs or less. I'm talking about the big names that have hundreds and thousands of subscribers that are just rabid. Like I said, the critters especially have been known to really go after anybody that disagrees with them or disagrees with whoever. Here's my kind of line in the sand. You know, Jeff's Gamebox isn't a hype channel. You know, it's not a pipeline for somebody's product. It's a space for real GMs and real players who still believe in the magic of imagination and shared storytelling. I do reviews. Sure, I do a lot of reviews, and much like another big dungeon tuber, I kind of follow his example. I don't review a game unless I really enjoy it. I won't review a product unless I'm really into it. I just don't think negative reviews are really something I want to start doing, because that'll go down a road we don't want to go down. And I talk about Dragonbane specifically. Okay, I mentioned it because I love it. I can make monsters because I use them. I talk about the GM advice because I've lived it. I know the fire and fatigue that come with running a game table, running any game table. And I'm going to grow. I'm going to grow being myself and not just a parody of the loudest voice in the room, and not as a puppet for Wizards of the Coast or Darrington Press, no matter how bad I might want to sell out just to get more views. I mean, yes, the thought has occurred. I've actually talked with a good friend quite a bit on Twitter, messaging back and forth about, it's like, should I switch my content over to D&D? Should I switch my content over to Daggerheart? Should I switch my content over to the MCDM role-playing game when it comes out? There's the temptation is there. If you're a viewer feeling burnt out by the TTRPG content cycle, this channel's for you. If you're a creator drowning in numbers, this is your reminder. Your voice matters. Your weirdness matters. And as I've said before, fly your freak flag high. Don't bury your message in sponsored scripts and corporate PR and things that, they might pay the bills, and that's great. Just don't lump them all into one video. The nice thing about YouTube is you can put out 5 videos a day and nobody's gonna complain, But I think a lot of little videos with maybe one product message out of 3 videos is just fine. I think lumping, like I said, 4 or 5 product pitches plus your Gen Con appearances and everything else into one video is kind of overkill. And I don't know if I've been silenced in a couple of DungeonTubers comments or not. There's a good chance of it at this point, because I've spoken out multiple times against over-commercialization on their channel. If you're tired of the noise, maybe you'll find something quieter, truer, and just a little weirder here. Stay weird, stay kind. Don't be a jerk to your fellow human beings at the table. And I'll see you in the next video. Thank you for being here.